Good afternoon. We are going to go over another deck. This is generally kind of a slower deck, but usually if it does begin to work, it can be quite interesting kind of quick. This one doesn't usually enjoy too much success as far as winning, though it to me is an interesting concept as far as decks go. This is a slightly modified version of my current deck. This is what it should become at some point. However, I will kind of go over some of the details as to what my deck currently looks like as compared to what it is currently on this. So pretty much we're going to go ahead and start this one. And now the goal of this particular deck is named after what we call the Possessed Portal, which will be this card here. So the deck actually revolves around trying to make that into a functional deck. It reads, as you can see in the top right corner there. So at the end of each turn, each player sacrifices a permanent unless he or she discards a card from his or her hand. This will also stop people from drawing cards at the beginning of their turn. So essentially this will hopefully shut down the game as far as positioning on both sides of the board. Now the goal is to make it to that, which is 8 mana, and however it is colorless, so therefore you can run things like the Urzas and things of that sort. The goal itself of the deck is to gradually try to gain advantage on the board over your opponent. And then hopefully that will be the win condition at some point once you have more stuff on the board than them, and they'll be able to take them out afterward. Everything currently revolves around that particular concept. The mana base is going to be a couple lands. The reason why you have basic lands in here can be any color, it doesn't actually matter as long as they're basic, is for the Mycosynth Well Springs. These essentially are a 2-for-1 deal. Usually if you drop this card, you go to one land, and then if you destroy it, which this deck is very prone to destroying even some of your own stuff, you will again get another land. This can be used towards sacrifice when you get Possessed Portal out, but you could also fodder it whenever you do the Culling Scales. So early game, the goal is to try and get the set. So in this case, we'll drop a tower, and then we would end our turn otherwise. Draw a card, drop the mine. Again, there's not much we can do, but we can drop the Wellspring, which will at least feed us another land. So we'll grab another one of these swamps and throw it into our hand. Another thing that this deck does use quite effectively is what we call the Culling Scales. At the beginning of your upkeep, destroy target non-land permanent with the lowest converted mana cost among non-land permanents in play. This is a good early thing because a lot of decks usually will run 1-2 drops, sometimes tokens, things like that. This will help kind of clear that up because you don't want to drop Possessed Portal and then your opponent has, say, 10 tokens. It tends to cause problems when you're trying to out-tempo them with a number of presence on the board. So with that, right now we're going to be at 2 mana, so we'll end up ending our turn. Since we did not get the set, it's still not bad, but again, we'll have our 3 mana. The cutoff for most of the stuff in this deck is going to be about 3 mana cost. Anything that is less than 3 is meant to be destroyed at some point. For example, the Darksteel Ingot is going to work a lot with the Culling Scale. Once the Culling Scale checks the board for anything 0 mana cost and destroys something, if there's not anything there, it'll go to 1. If there's nothing there, it'll go to 2. Usually that will get rid of my Mycosynth Wellsprings, which will then in turn give me another land. If there's nothing in the 2s, it'll go to 3. Usually, well, also with the wording of Culling Scales, if it is tied with another permanent, you get to choose that particular permanent. So once it hits 3, normally it could possibly destroy your scales as well. But since you want to avoid that, what you could do is target, say, a Darksteel Mirror, which is indestructible. There's also Darksteel Ingot, which is also indestructible. These are all at your 3 mana tier. We'll say with this particular one, though, we're going to go ahead and drop the Darksteel Mirror. This allows you to have a blocker. If the opponent has a trample creature, it's not going to do a whole lot of good. But if it's non-trampled creatures, he can just get in the way and he doesn't die very easily. Unless the creature has Wither or Infect or something like that. So we'll go ahead and untap and draw again. So we got another Swamp. Again, we drew another Mirror. He taps for 2 colorless mana. As you've noticed earlier, the goal is essentially to get as much mana as possible as early as possible. So most of the stuff is going to be dedicated towards strictly getting the mana you need as quickly as possible. In this particular case, we're going to be at 3-4. Since we can tap for this for mana when it comes into play, but it won't actually get us anything else into play in addition. So what we'll probably do is drop our Mirror. That way, next turn we'll have 2 more mana. Afterwards, we'll end our turn and draw. Another Swamp, not the best thing ever, but it'll still be fine. So, at this particular case, we have 7 mana total. 2 with a Mirror, 5 on the board. So let's go ahead and do 3 for an Ingot. 1, 2, 3 for Scales. And then from there, this is when everything starts to develop into what it needs to be developed into. And draw a card. And drop a mana. So, as I mentioned, the Culling Scale is now going to search around for the lowest mana cost. Since we don't actually have an opponent being shown right now, we'll just pretend it's going to only target our side of the board for this time being. Oftentimes it'll actually also target their side of the board, which oftentimes will get rid of like a lot of the small things like Landalars or Birds of Paradise or Ornithopters or anything that could cause problems in the future. So he's also going to hopefully add to this. He is a 3/3 flash Vigilance indestructible. He is kind of costly mana-wise, but again, since the deck is mostly based around ramping up mana, he's good just for being a blocker and or sometimes also offense. Though generally, the goal of him is not necessarily to do offense, it's more so to protect you. But since he has Vigilance, he can attack and defend. And since he's indestructible, he doesn't die very easily. But he also adds a trick to it too, since he does have Flash. If they were to swing in, since you have those 2 creatures, they know that you probably don't necessarily want to block with their 2/2 Mirror because that's also part of your mana base. Unless you feel as though you have enough mana at this point. Or unless you feel like you can kill one of their creatures without losing your Mirror in the process. However, let's say if they attacked with 3 2/2 creatures, you could easily tap the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and drop them into play during their turn, and then block. Which again, hopefully should cut down what they're throwing at you as well. So we'll go ahead and draw again, another Ingot. So far we're not quite getting to where we need to. Sometimes it can be an issue with this deck, because at this point the goal is to try and push for the Possessed Portal. But since this is now going to check again, so it's going to go from 0 mana, nothing there, 1 mana, nothing there, 2 mana, which will target the Wellspring, which will destroy it. And then we will search our library for another basic land. And at that point, we did not play a land yet. We'll go ahead and drop another Ingot. And Junk Diver, currently, that is what I kind of want in the deck, Currently I am running in Eldrazi, the one that returns a creature to the battlefield. The reason I wanted to go with Junk Diver instead is the fact that he's going to be much cheaper mana-wise. The Eldrazi still works perfectly fine, because what's going to happen, we'll go ahead and draw into another thing before we get to the other card, is Argentum Armor. The sole purpose of this, usually I will equip it to a Darksteel Mirror if I don't have the Sentinel. If I do have the Sentinel, I'll just drop it on the Sentinel. The damage is good, because it'll make him a 9/9. The main purpose that I have it in there is the fact that, again, it destroys target permanent. So essentially you can start wiping out permanents on the other side of the board. Your entire goal is to prepare yourself for the Possessed Portal and hopefully have more permanents and cards in hand than your opponent. So let's say if I were to drop Possessed Portal, this would again start to shut down the game. We'll go ahead and discard most of this. We'll just pretend that we drew Possessed Portal about the third card in. At this point, at the beginning of their turn, they're not going to draw. At the end of each turn, each player sacrifices a permanent. So at the end of my turn, when I would have put this down, each of us are going to sacrifice a permanent, me and my opponents. So let's say if I were to just get rid of a land, and we'll just say that that was a permanent I'm going to get rid of, and then they're going to get rid of a permanent. They're going to end their turn. They won't be able to draw, so they have to either discard or get rid of a permanent. So they get rid of a permanent. They do some stuff. They end their turn. Now come back to my turn. Culling Scales are going to trigger. If they have anything that's 3 cost or below, Culling Scales will wipe out one of those permanents. And then afterwards, if Argentum Armor was out, the Sentinel would try to rush through and destroy another permanent. At the end of the turn, each player will sacrifice a permanent or discard a card. So let's say, again, we get rid of another swamp. Essentially, we don't really need them too much, because we still have a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 mana. At most, you might need about 8 or 9. But let's say if we wanted to draw up 3 mana for another Ingot, and a Junk Diver. The Junk Diver, whenever he's put into a graveyard for play, return another target artifact from your graveyard to your hand. Mostly what these are going to be useful for is to bring things back. So let's say I end my turn, I have to sacrifice a permanent, we'll get rid of Junk Diver. In turn, I have to return an artifact. If I had another Junk Diver in there, I could bounce it back to my hand. It would go to their turn, they would again end their turn, everyone sacrifices a permanent. My mana base is fine, but let's say we'll go and get rid of... This will also revolve quite a bit on what they currently have on their side of the board as well, but at this point you could probably consider getting rid of, say, the Darksteel Mirror if they don't have very many blockers or attackers left. If they do, then worst case, drop another land. So let's say we untap, and then again no one draws. I will play 3 mana to put him in play, which then I'll end my turn, which will kill him. And put another Diver back into my hand. So again, as you can see, essentially I'll be losing 1 permanent for every 2 my opponent does. And then also Culling Scales is going to wipe out anything 3 cost or below, because if it ties for 3, it'll trigger against like a Darksteel Mirror or a Darksteel Ingot. If I do so, the Scales does not actually hurt me. So that is going to be the purpose of this deck. It's a fairly budget deck. Some of the most expensive things are the ones that I do not currently have in this deck, in my actual current deck. The main modifications that I've made is that in this one I put a Gilded Lotus in here. Currently I think I just run another mirror, just a cheap common mirror that taps for like 1 mana. It doesn't really matter the type, there's one for each of the 5 colors. And that comes out in turn 2 as compared to this one coming out a little bit later. But this can help you in the late game with your mana base, so you can keep getting rid of land and you'll still be fine. Some of the other changes I've made, as I said, with the Junk Diver. This one's a little more pricey, which is the main reason that I don't currently have them in the deck. The Eldrazi is the 9-drop, which returns target creature. I think it's the Artisan of Kozilek, if I remember correctly. He comes out for 9 mana instead of the 3 here. But on the flip side of that too, with the Artisan, he's a little bit better because he also has the Annihilator too, which this again will add to the idea of trying to knock out the number of permanents on their side of the board. He also does a bit of damage in the process, so it also kind of doubles as a kill condition, on top of wiping out the number of permanents on their side of the board as you go. So, just a couple different ways of playing it. As I said, it's not a very fast deck or powerful deck, but if it gets going, it could be quite interesting. I wouldn't say that this would be a competitive deck, but it's still fairly casual. It still functions at what it's supposed to do. However, as I said, it's not going to be very fast or very good against the more competitive decks out there. So I do hope you enjoyed this, and hopefully this may give you some ideas as far as other decks that you may have considered making, and possibly routes you can take with, turning what looks to be a really bad card into something that at least functions as a deck. And that's what I try to do with Possessed Portal, and that's what this deck ended up becoming. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.